Hello and most welcome to H1863. It is indeed progressing rapidly here, no doubt about that. We will continue Francis Y. Lynn's article, The Grammatical Nature of Wittgenstein's Private Language Investigation. Last time we went into 1861, how the inner is tied up with the outer, and if there is no criterion for a word concept, it lacks meaning. The meaning lies in the criterion, the use. We have pain because we can feel pain. There needs to be some sort of expression at the bottom. Expression, pointing, directing, interacting. That also goes for all aspects. So in the cheese example of PI 142, it is not an outer cheese, so to speak, that is independent of our measuring device and our understanding of it. It is interconnected. The rule would not work if the cheese didn't have the same size. But that doesn't mean that it is completely separate from us. And here two good quotes. 580 from Philosophical Investigations. An inner process stands in need of outward criteria. The inner is tied up with the outer, not only empirically, but also logically. This means that action and the words we have are codependent, and that everything is, I would say, everything is about shades. We will intensify the concepts, the words, by doing the actions more, getting into the world, act in every situation in all different ways. By being responsible, active in the world, we bring meaning to what we say and think and do. There is also a mentioning in the last how we can get astray. In some specific examples, a use can be without connection to action directly. What we do is we take the abnormal and make it into norm. That becomes the specific abnormal situation. We lift it out of that situation and we forget where it came from. And we will end up in some cases as far as the private language problem. It's a belief in a complete disjunction between reality and what we mean, our concepts. There's a mentioning here, but the philosopher fails to notice the change of circumstances, and he takes it for granted that words can still have meaning in the abnormal private situation, and that private language is possible. It takes time to go into that misunderstanding. Does not happen all of a sudden. Continue where we left off, just before the beginning of a new subchapter. And we've been talking about the S sense. That's oddly enough close to essence, but it's S sense. It has some differences. If S sense is violated, then it is senseless to say of a person that he has a sensation S. That private language is senseless can be said to be due to the violation of this condition of sense. Wittgenstein's diagnosis helps the philosopher to see the error in his thinking and helps him to see that private language is senseless and is a grammatical illusion. Seven, the senseless of private rule following. According to my interpretation so far, the PLA is quite clear. The no criterion of correctness thesis follows from the no natural expressions feature of private language. Which in turn follows directly from the definition of private language. So, N, the thesis that private language is senseless, let me repeat that, follows from the no criterion of correctness thesis and the grammatical rule N. So N plays an important role in the private language argument. Yet, curiously, N cannot be found in PI. What kind of PLA is there in PI? We find Wittgenstein speaking of the rules of private language in PI 259. I think that he sees that speaking a language is an instance of rule following, and hence that the discussion of private language can be made on a more general level of rule following. So, how to show the senselessness of private language on this more general level? Well, speaking a private language is following the rules of the language privately. In order to show that private language is senseless, Wittgenstein must show that following a rule privately is senseless. I think that the PLA I described in the preceding sections provides a model for doing this. The phrase following a rule would be senseless if there is no criterion of correctness for the use. In other words, there must be criteria of correctness for judging whether one is following a rule or not. This is just the point of the second sentence in PI 202. That's why following a rule is a practice. And to think one is following a rule is not to follow a rule. And that's why one cannot follow a rule privately. Otherwise, thinking one was following a rule would be the same thing as following it. To think one is following a rule is not to follow a rule. Without a criterion of correctness, thinking one was following a rule would be the same as following it. And this would render the concept of rule following senseless. So the second sentence in PI 202, which I will refer to as PI 202 2, expresses the following idea. FR, following a rule, must have a criterion of correctness for its use. Otherwise, it is senseless. FR can stand alone, or it can be seen as an instance of N. This is because following a rule can be seen as a name applying to rule following activities and not to rule following activities. FR is a grammatical rule for the use of the words following a rule. PI 2023 then says that FR is a reason why one cannot follow a rule privately. What does it mean to say that one cannot follow a rule privately? The word can't here is ambiguous. It can mean cannot physically or cannot logically. It can mislead us to think that if one tried hard enough, one would be able to follow a rule privately. But Wittgenstein obviously means that one cannot logically follow a rule privately. To avoid such errors, Wittgenstein makes the following suggestion. It is misleading to use the word cannot because it suggests a wrong analogy. We should say it has no sense to say. Thus, what Wittgenstein in PI 202.3 really wants to say is that private rule following is senseless. It is clear that FR cannot be the sole reason for the senselessness of private rule following, for it is not sufficient for deducing the latter. Another reason must be that private rule following lacks a criterion of correctness. Now, how can Wittgenstein prove this? Wittgenstein does not explicitly prove this in any of his writings. I think it can be proved in the same way as the proposition that private sensation naming lacks a criterion of correctness is proved. First, we need to have a definition of private rule following. I think that the definition could be this: the private speaker invents a series of words such as R1, R2, R3, etc., and claim that he is following a number of different rules by writing down different words. But no other person can understand his words. This can only happen when he has no expression for his alleged rule following acts. Second, from this it follows that the private speaker has no criterion correctness for using his rule following words. When he claims that he is following a rule A, he cannot logically tell whether he is following this rule or a different rule. Because he has no expressions for his alleged rule-following acts. To sum up, Wittgenstein's PLI in PI is conducted at the level of rule following. In the place of N, Wittgenstein makes use of FR, which is in effect an instance of N. The thesis that private rule following is senseless can be proved in a way analogous to that in which the thesis that private word is senseless is proved. Proved. This is a good place to bring in my interpretation of PI 257, which is commonly thought to play an important role in the PLI. Here I only quote the most relevant part of the section. When one says, he gave a name to his sensation, one forgets that a great deal of stage setting in the language is presupposed if the mere act of naming is to make sense. And when we speak of someone's having given a name to pain, what is presupposed is the existence of the grammar of the word pain. It shows the post where the new word is stationed. According to this passage, in order to say that the person names a sensation of his as pain, the grammar of the word pain must be already be in place. It's not sentence. This grammar is the stage set. And Wittgenstein wants to remind us of it. What is the grammar of the word pain? It should consist of a number of grammatical rules for the use of the word. I think that one of the grammatical rules is N. For the name pain to make sense, there must be a criterion of correctness for using it. In PI, Wittgenstein does not remind us of N, but of FR instead. The effects are the same as explained just now. He goes on in PI 258 to point out that the private speaker's word pain or any other private word lacks a criterion for correctness. So, on my interpretation, the role of 257 of the PI is to remind us of the grammatical rule N or FR. And PI 257 is therefore indeed important for the PLA. A question can arise concerning the relationship between my interpretation of the PLA and Wittgenstein's PLA remarks. It is commonly assumed that the PLA is contained in PI 243 to 315. But I mainly relied on PI 142, that is the cheese paragraph, and PI 202 for FR, and PI 243 for the definition of private language. PI 256 for the no natural expressions feature. PI 257 for the reminding of the grammatical rule NFR. And PI 258 for the no criterion of correctness thesis. What is the rule of other sections in PI 243 to 315? This question will be dealt with in the next section. The role of some other sections in PI on private language. As I said at the end of the preceding sections, In my analysis, the PLA in PI consists of PI 142, 202, 243, 256 to 258. In addition to these remarks, Wittgenstein also writes many other remarks on private language. Here, I would like to confine myself to PI 265 to 271. What is their role? If my analysis is right, then these sections in PI are not strictly speaking part of the PLA, but they must be somehow useful for the PLA. In what sense can they be useful then? I think that the role of these sections in PI is providing objects of comparison which are meant to throw light on the facts of our language by way not only of similarities but also dissimilarities. In other words, our method is not merely to enumerate actual usages of words, but rather deliberately to invent new ones. Some of them, because of their absurd appearance, that's from the Brown Book, in PI 265 to 271. Several examples with absurd appearance are invented. They help us see that there are other cases where there is no criterion of correctness in addition to the diary case. They are examples of intermediate cases. PI 122. In each of which there's no criterion of correctness. Wittgenstein let us see the connections between these cases and the case of private language. Their function is therefore similar to that of the cheese example in PI 142. That's an excellent stopping point there. Cheese example in PI 142. So let's check some quotes here. Well, the chapter's name was the senseless of private rule following. And what he brings in there is that N is a variety of FR following a rule. So the N rule comes in here, the grammatical rule. And the N is more in the line of correctness. On page 15, we find on the second paragraph, I think that the PLI I described in the preceding sections provides a model for doing this. The phrase following a rule would be senseless if there is no criterion of correctness for its use. And there you have it, the FR in a nutshell. There must be a criterion, otherwise you have no rule. As he says in PI, that's why following a rule is a practice. And to think one is following a rule is not to follow a rule. And here is a clarification further down. The paragraphs are very short. Bear with me, Kalle Lundahl. Let's see here. If we go down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the sixth paragraph is the paragraph that begins with FR in parenthesis. That's the one, yeah. And it's on the fifth line. I'll start a bit early, I think. So Wittgenstein writes that you cannot follow a rule privately. It's a bit ambiguous. It can mean cannot physically or cannot logically. But what he means is without any doubt, and I come to that understanding too, it is logically impossible. Very important. It's not physically impossible, it's logically. It doesn't make sense. It will break the laws of language, and it cannot be done. So in a way, as pointed out here, it's a tad misleading, I would say. To use the word can't. Rather, it would be better to say it has no sense to say. If we may then go to the very last paragraph, then it's easier to find your way. And on the third line, another reason must be that private rule following lacks a criterion of correctness. And I think that indicates also we need that criterion on a personal level, on a society level. As humans, we can make good use of this understanding. We benefit from it. We need it to make any progress whatsoever. Without it, there is no progress, there is no thinking, nothing. We'll be completely lost without it. It is our compass, as you know, compass. It is our director, our guide. And in the end, if you don't understand this, which most of us don't, as the year passes, our words become less and less meaningful, and we slump, I would say. There is a connection to bodily posture. You lose yourself. You'll end in pain. Go to the next page. So the beginning sentence here, when he claims that he's following a rule, the private speaker we're talking about, a rule R, by writing R, he cannot logically tell whether he's following this rule or a different rule. He has no expressions for his alleged rule-following acts. You go nuts, more or less. You will not be able to progress thinkingly within yourself. Intellectually, less understanding will occur. And I make a parallel here. If you start going into the direction of private language, that is the misunderstanding, which is the leadership of the left hemisphere, to bring in McGilchrist in here. It doesn't make any sense. And I'd say from Francis Wylin here and Wittgenstein, we get a much easier explanation how things went the way they did. Although I share McGilchrist's view, this is easier to get grip on. We need exteriority as we need the interior. They are deeply connected, and I would like to call that, as you can see on the fourth paragraph, I think it is, second line, this grammar is stage set, is the stage set, and Wittgenstein wants to remind us of it. Think of a stage and actors. They go together, hand in hand. If we have only a stage, there is no theater. But if we have only actors, there is no proper theater either. They go hand in hand. They need the space to move, to make their gestures, to interact, move away from each other. It's part and parcel, not separable. And it's not that you cannot separate them. It doesn't make any sense to do it, which is quite different. So that is one thing that Lynn is straightening out here, quite precisely, I'd say. Kalle Lundahl, please enter.
Let's suppose situation. I get up at 8 a.m. And then I go to work, and there is a boss who checks that I enter, let's say, at 9 a.m. So the private language would be I go up at 8 a.m. It's up to me when I get up. The important thing is that I am at the work at 9 a.m. So the private language is in 8 a.m. I have decided myself I go out at 8 a.m. But then the boss says that I'm there at work at 9 a.m. So this is the shared language, to make sense that I am at work at 9 a.m. Otherwise, there are only private rules, which doesn't make sense. Anyhow, we have to think that things are also entangled here. So private language and shared language is a little bit entangled because it supposes a private language from my part that I got up at a certain time to get to be at work at. So we shouldn't think that these are completely separated either. And to go to the example with sola scriptura with Luther. So in this case, the private language would be Luther saying, I do this according to the rule that the Bible is the only criterion, sola scriptura. So that would be completely his private language. He's saying this to himself first. But then he has, what is his boss? Or his boss in this case is no longer the Pope, but the community. So he has to bring out his message. So it's a new tradition actually of public language to make his point. So that is the community.
I was actually thinking when you say go to work, if you try to go to the gym, you have the criterion, I must go to the gym 3 times a week, say, and you establish the meaning of the word going to the gym by going to the gym, and that takes time. This is clearly pointed out by Wittgenstein. You cannot follow a rule by doing it once. You do it several times. And by following that rule, the words going to the gym start making sense. They do not make sense in the beginning, but as you do as you say, you see the connection here? Words and action. The words get their meaning. But then it can be this fellow Y, and he says, I go to the gym, but he doesn't. And therefore, his words do not mean much, or they mean nothing almost if they go all the way to the private language. So it takes time. And if we transfer that to Martin Luther, you can say the way the Bible was treated earlier had a lot of acts, like going to the gym. You had the clergy, you had doings, they did millions of things. How many hours? That would be maybe 1 billion hours or 2 billion hours. And they, in connection with all their doings, there was a pressing on doings in the Catholic Church. You need to do things, the liturgy, the hymns, going to the church, building church. It cannot even be stated how much it is. That is the meaning of reading the Bible, so to speak. Martin Luther started a new one. Of course, it shared some traits. He was a monk, so some of the traditions were shared. But my guess is, and that's my guess, has nothing to do with the Wittgenstein lecture, but my guess it acquired less meaning because it was less doing. It is actually up to the numbers of hours. So you don't have, I can stand here free from any connections to reality, no hours of work, and I can say I go to the gym. You cannot say that. And we know those people exist. And we smile a little bit. Yeah, yeah. Jonas is going to the gym. We know about those things already. I think that helped maybe.
Yes, indeed, you need practice. Think about Luther. So first he nailed his thesis on the door. So there was first a shock effect. How does he dare? But as time went by and he hammered in his message, so to say, metaphorically, literally, people get used to this new idea. So you need time behind the words. Absolutely. So you need practice.
It's the amount of hours that counts and how much physical activity there is. Mm-hmm. So he's very clear about you need to move, literally move. Mm. You need to go to the gym. Mm. As you mentioned in the earlier, you need to go to work. Mm-hmm.
You need the pain of gym.
Definitely. The pain is a helper, it's not something bad. And then you can have goodness exclusively. The gym won't be painful in the end. Mm-hmm.
Yes, otherwise pain will only be a concept in your brain.
Yeah.
The sweat of the gym.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. Because we all know going to the gym regularly, in the end, all the pain is gone. Mm. And it's replaced by pure pleasure. And that pleasure is much greater than the one you had before starting going to the gym. Mm-hmm. So it's beneficial for us. And I'm starting to think that getting more and more certain that the Ian McGilchrist left hemisphere is connected to private language. Remember what he said, only representational, having no connection to the outer world. The left hemisphere doesn't even connect to the own body. It sounds like private language to me. And we know people who are affected by schizophrenia, they do very little, if anything. They cannot get their words to have any effect. So I think there's a connection here. We need to tell Ian McKilchrist.
No, I think the idea of privateness it can be both helpful and is something helpful and harmful. So in Jesus gave example of a widow who in secret gave a big part of her earnings to the treasury of the temple. So this was a good example of privateness. Yeah. But the point is here in this private sense of privateness is that it was for the common good. Yeah. Which had an effect. So this widow knew, although nobody knew about that except God, is that had a great effect of and therefore today we have lost this thing that if you do something privately, it doesn't really have any effect. Perhaps only on me. Yeah, good point, Kalle. And we know also from the Nobel Prize in Quantum Physics from the last year, there are really nothing private. No. So the Nobel Prize actually proves Wittgenstein's point. Yeah. Whatever happens in one point of universe, me doing something private, which is perhaps not good. I think if I do it privately, it doesn't really affect anybody. But the Nobel Prize of last year, 2022, proves the opposite. Yeah, it does have effect. And it's a very good example because Wittgenstein donated a lot of his money for no apparent reason, and not anybody know about this. This is the thing he treasured. So we are interacting with the world. By acting into the world, we make our own life richer. And Wittgenstein got progressively more and more happy at the end of his life. So, and he was a deeply spiritual man also, one of the few ones in the past century, if not the only one I heard. It's very interesting. Any final? So we should not forget that private language argument has a deep ethical implications.
Yeah, it does actually. Yeah,
proven by quantum physics.
It's. Yeah, it is definitely seriously, and ethics are very important. So either as you do as the widow, and help people. Nothing needs to be known as long as you do it. Go to the gym, give the money, or do it in public. It's your choice, but do something. Then your words will mean also. And the more you do it, the more meaning will come to the words. Well, thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Have a very pleasant morning, afternoon, night, evening, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.